My name is Eleanor Wilson, and I'm 68 years old. I still remember the day I arrived at my only son Matthew's wedding, dressed in my finest silk dress, heart brimming with pride. The look on his face when he saw me wasn't joy but panic. He pulled me aside and uttered words that shattered my heart. "Mom, I'm sorry, but you weren't invited. You need to go away." I left silently, tears threatening to fall, but what happened next changed everything between us forever. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Have you ever experienced rejection from a loved one? Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about family relationships and the tough lessons we learn. Life wasn't always this complicated between Matthew and me. We used to be incredibly close, especially after his father James died in a construction accident when Matthew was just 10 years old. I can still picture that rainy Tuesday when two police officers knocked on our door. Their solemn faces told me everything before they even spoke. James had fallen from scaffolding at a high-rise building site. He died instantly, they said, as if that would somehow ease the pain. Suddenly, I was a 37-year-old widow with a young son to raise alone. We had some savings but not nearly enough to sustain us long-term. James had been the primary breadwinner while I worked part-time as a bookkeeper. With him gone, our financial security vanished overnight. Insurance money helped initially, but I knew I needed a sustainable plan. I took on multiple jobs while trying to be there for Matthew during his grief. Mornings at a local accounting firm, evenings waiting tables, and weekends helping a realtor friend stage houses for showings. Those were exhausting years, but they sparked something unexpected in me. I discovered I had a knack for identifying undervalued properties. With a small loan and every penny of our savings, I purchased my first fixer-upper. I renovated it myself on weekends, learning plumbing and basic electrical work from library books and kind neighbors who took pity on the widow trying to make something of herself. 6 months later, I sold that house for nearly double my investment. That first success led to another, then another. By the time Matthew was in high school, I had built a respectable real estate business. When he graduated college 15 years later, I was what people called a self-made millionaire, with a portfolio of commercial and residential properties across 3 states. Through those building years, Matthew and I were a team. He helped me paint walls and install cabinet hardware after school. I never missed his soccer games or science fairs despite my hectic schedule. We had Friday movie nights with pizza no matter how tired I was. I wanted him to know that even without his father, he was loved completely. Matthew grew into a thoughtful young man with James's height and my determination. He excelled academically and earned a scholarship to study architecture. I couldn't have been prouder watching him walk across that stage at graduation, the first Wilson to complete college. We celebrated with a trip to Italy, visiting buildings he had studied and dreamed about. After college, Matthew joined a prestigious firm in the city. His career flourished, and though we lived just 30 minutes apart, our time together gradually decreased. I understood. He was building his own life, establishing himself professionally. Our Sunday brunches became monthly, then quarterly, but the quality of our relationship remained strong. Then Matthew met Natalie Harrington at a charity gala 4 years ago. She was striking, with perfectly styled blonde hair and an infectious laugh that drew people to her. The daughter of Richard and Judith Harrington, old money from banking and real estate development, Natalie had grown up in a world of privilege that Matthew found fascinating. Initially, Natalie was warm toward me. She complimented my business acumen and asked thoughtful questions about how I'd built my company. I liked her intelligence and the way she made Matthew smile. I thought she might bridge our different worlds. The first hint of trouble came during a dinner at the Harrington estate. Richard asked about my background, and when I mentioned my humble beginnings and years of manual labor, a subtle shift occurred in his expression. Judith changed the subject quickly, steering conversation toward people they knew from their country club, names that meant nothing to me. After that evening, I noticed Matthew began adopting new mannerisms. He corrected my grammar occasionally. He upgraded his wardrobe substantially. When I offered him leftover containers after dinner at my house, he declined, mentioning that Natalie prepared special meals for their week. Small things perhaps, but they felt significant. The distance between us grew over the next 2 years. Matthew's visits became briefer, more formal. He stopped bringing Natalie along. When I asked about her, his answers were vague but polite. I sensed he was compartmentalizing his life, with me in a box that was increasingly separate from his future with the Harringtons. I tried maintaining our connection. I sent thoughtful gifts, suggested activities we had once enjoyed together, and kept my door and heart open. But with each passing month, my son moved further into Natalie's world and further from mine. I tried not to take it personally. After all, wasn't this what I had worked so hard for? For Matthew to have opportunities and choices beyond what I had known. Still, I couldn't help but notice how the Harringtons looked at me during the rare occasions we were together. To them, I was new money, lacking the pedigree and polish that came from generational wealth. No matter how successful my business became, to families like the Harringtons, I would always be the waitress who got lucky in real estate. The engagement announcement came via text message 2 years after Matthew and Natalie started dating. Not a call, not a visit, just a simple message. "Great news, Mom." Natalie said yes. "We're engaged." Attached was a photo of Natalie's hand sporting a diamond ring that must have cost Matthew several months' salary. I called immediately to congratulate them, but the conversation was brief. Matthew said they were celebrating with the Harringtons and would tell me details later. Those details never really came. When I asked about wedding plans in the following weeks, Matthew's responses were non-committal. Natalie and her mother are handling most of it, or we're still figuring things out. I offered to host an engagement party, but Matthew declined, saying Judith had already planned one at their country club. I wasn't invited to that celebration. I saw photos later on social media. Matthew in a tailored suit standing beside Natalie in a designer dress, surrounded by people I'd never met. My son looked happy but somehow different, as if he'd stepped into a role in someone else's play. 3 months into their engagement, I finally broached the subject of financial help. Though Matthew hadn't asked, I wanted to contribute to their special day. "I'd like to help with the wedding expenses," I told him during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "I've been blessed financially, and it would mean a lot to me to be part of your big day." There was a pause before Matthew responded. "That's generous, Mom. Let me talk to Natalie and get back to you." A week later he called back. "We appreciate the offer, Mom. Natalie's parents are covering most things, but maybe you could handle the flowers? The wedding planner will contact you with details." Flowers. A small component of what I knew would be an extravagant affair. I swallowed my disappointment and agreed. Andrea Reynolds, the wedding planner, called me the following day. She was professional but warm, explaining that the Harringtons had specified certain floral arrangements that would cost approximately $15,000. I didn't flinch at the amount, though it seemed excessive for flowers that would wilt within days. "Actually," I said, "I'd like to discuss increasing my contribution. Matthew is my only child, and I've saved for his wedding since he was small." Andrea hesitated. "The Harringtons have been very specific about their vision." "I understand," I replied, "but I'd like to meet with you privately to discuss options." We met at my home the following week. Andrea brought portfolios of the planned wedding, a vineyard affair for 200 guests with estimated costs that made even me, a successful businesswoman, raise my eyebrows. As she detailed the plans, I noticed something odd. "These catering and venue deposits," I said, pointing to the budget. "They're listed as pending. Haven't the Harringtons paid them yet? The wedding is only 5 months away." Andrea shifted uncomfortably. "Between us, Mrs. Wilson, there have been some delays in payments. Mr. Harrington mentioned temporary liquidity issues with some investments." That revelation surprised me. Richard Harrington projected such financial confidence. Was it possible the Harrington fortune wasn't as secure as everyone believed? What if I covered those deposits? I suggested, anonymously. "Matthew doesn't need to know it's coming from me rather than the Harringtons." Andrea looked relieved. "That would certainly solve our immediate timeline issues. And I'd like to establish a fund for the remaining major expenses as well," I added, still anonymously. "Consider it a backup to ensure my son's day goes perfectly regardless of any liquidity issues." By the end of our meeting, I had become the primary financial sponsor of Matthew and Natalie's wedding, though only Andrea knew. I didn't do it to control anything. I simply wanted to ensure Matthew's special day would proceed without stress, and perhaps I wanted to feel meaningfully involved in a process from which I'd been largely excluded. As the wedding date approached, the coldness from Natalie and her family intensified. At the one planning meeting I was invited to, Judith spoke over me repeatedly and dismissed my few suggestions with tight smiles. "We're going for a certain aesthetic," she explained when I suggested including some of Matthew's favorite music. "The playlist has been carefully curated." After that meeting, I overheard Judith speaking to Natalie in the venue's bathroom. "Eleanor is sweet, but she doesn't understand our world," she said. "This wedding needs to impress the right people. It's about connections, about establishing your and Matthew's place in society." Natalie's response cut deep. "I know. Matthew's mostly on board, but he still has those sentimental attachments. Don't worry, once we're married, things will naturally shift." I left without letting them know I'd heard, but their words echoed in my mind for weeks afterward. What sentimental attachments did Matthew need to outgrow? Was I among them? Matthew's behavior continued to change as the wedding approached. He adopted the Harringtons' opinions on everything from politics to wine preferences. He spoke about people from his childhood as if they were quaint characters from a former life. When I mentioned his father's anniversary, Matthew changed the subject to a gala he and Natalie were attending. Despite the growing distance, I continued my financial support behind the scenes. When Andrea mentioned that Judith had requested last-minute upgrades to the table settings and entertainment that exceeded the budget, I quietly covered the difference. When the venue required an additional insurance policy, I handled it immediately. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received an elegant invitation by mail. It seemed the final guest list had been settled at last. I ran my fingers over the embossed lettering, feeling a mix of relief and sadness that I needed a formal invitation to my only child's wedding at all. The morning of Matthew's wedding dawned bright and clear. I had spent weeks selecting the perfect outfit, a champagne-colored silk dress with a matching jacket, elegant but not showy. I wanted to look appropriate for the upscale vineyard venue without drawing attention away from the bride. I had also prepared a special gift, a pocket watch that had belonged to James, Matthew's father. I had it restored and engraved with both James's and Matthew's initials. Inside, I placed a small note. "Your father would be so proud of the man you've become. His love and mine are with you always." The drive to Silver Creek Vineyard took nearly an hour. As I navigated the winding roads leading to the picturesque property, memories flooded back. Matthew learning to ride a bicycle, his graduation, the countless small moments that formed our bond as mother and son. I felt a flutter of nervousness but pushed it aside. Surely today, on this significant occasion, any tensions would dissolve in the joy of celebration. The vineyard was transformed. White chairs lined the hillside overlooking rows of grapevines and rolling countryside beyond. Floral arrangements in white and pale blue adorned the aisle. Staff in crisp uniforms directed arriving guests toward the ceremony space. I was early, hoping to have a quiet moment with Matthew before the proceedings began. The on-site coordinator directed me to a stone building where the groom's party was preparing. Several guests recognized me along the way, offering warm greetings. "Eleanor. It's been ages," said Thomas Reynolds, Matthew's friend since college. "Great to see you here. The place looks amazing." "It certainly does," I replied, feeling a sense of pride knowing I had helped make it possible. Just outside the stone building, I spotted Matthew through an open door. He was adjusting his tie, laughing with his groomsmen. My heart swelled seeing him so handsome in his tuxedo, so much like his father on our wedding day. I stood watching for a moment, not wanting to interrupt. Then Matthew turned and saw me. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise? Alarm? He excused himself from his friends and walked quickly toward me. "Mom," he said, his voice low. "What are you doing back here?" "I wanted to see you before the ceremony," I explained, reaching for the gift box in my purse. "To give you something special and wish you well." Matthew glanced around nervously. "Let's talk over here," he said, guiding me away from the building to a more private spot beneath an oak tree. Once we were alone, his demeanor changed completely. His shoulders tensed and he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Mom, there's been a misunderstanding, he began, each word measured. You're not supposed to be here. I stared at him, confused. What do you mean? I received an invitation. That was sent by mistake, Matthew said quickly. We had to make some final cuts to the guest list. Venue capacity restrictions. The vineyard sprawled around us, clearly able to accommodate hundreds. Matthew, I said gently, what's really going on? He sighed, running a hand through his carefully styled hair. Look, Natalie's parents were specific about the guest list. They wanted a certain type of crowd, people who move in their social circles. Business connections, family friends. And I don't fit into that category? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It's not personal, he insisted, though nothing could have felt more personal. It's about appearances. The Harringtons have a reputation to maintain. This wedding is important for my future with their firm as well. I took a step back, physically recoiling from words that struck like blows. I'm your mother, Matthew. Your only living parent. I know, and I care about you, he said, though his actions suggested otherwise. But things have changed. I'm part of Natalie's world now. This is her day, and her parents have certain expectations. And those expectations don't include the woman who raised you, who worked multiple jobs to put food on our table, who supported your education and dreams. Matthew's expression hardened. That was a long time ago, Mom. I'm grateful for what you did, but I've built my own life now. I've worked hard to fit into Natalie's world, and I can't let anything jeopardize that. Anything. I repeated. Is that what I am now? A potential embarrassment. You're twisting my words, Matthew said, checking his watch. Look, I need to get back. The ceremony starts in 45 minutes. I'm sorry about the confusion with the invitation, but it would be better if you left now. We can talk about this another time. I stood there, the gift box clutched in my hand, unable to believe what was happening. So you're asking me to leave your wedding? To drive away and pretend I don't have a son getting married today? Please don't make this harder than it needs to be, Matthew pleaded, glancing back toward the stone building. Some of Natalie's family are arriving. I need to greet them. In that moment, looking at my son's face, I no longer recognized him. The boy I had raised, who had once shown such kindness and integrity, seemed replaced by someone focused only on appearances and advancement. Keep your father's watch, I said quietly, pressing the box into his hand. Remember who you are, Matthew. Who you came from. He took the box automatically but didn't open it. I need to go, Mom. Please understand. I understand perfectly, I replied, summoning all my dignity. Goodbye, Matthew. I hope your wedding is everything you and the Harringtons want it to be. I turned and walked back to my car, head held high despite the crushing weight in my chest. I didn't allow myself to cry until I was safely inside, the doors locked, hidden from curious eyes. Then the tears came, hot and fast, as I started the engine and drove slowly down the vineyard's long gravel driveway. In my rearview mirror, the beautiful venue grew smaller, white tents and flowers fading from view. I had helped create that perfect setting, contributed to the day that I was now barred from witnessing. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it offered no comfort as I headed home alone, uninvited from my only child's wedding. The 30-mile drive home from Silver Creek Vineyard felt endless. I kept the radio off, needing the silence to process what had just happened. Traffic lights blurred through my tears, and twice I had to pull over when emotion overwhelmed me. You weren't invited. The words replayed in my mind, each repetition a fresh wound. How had we reached this point? Where had I gone wrong as a mother that my only child could dismiss me so easily? I thought about the countless nights I'd stayed up sewing Halloween costumes because we couldn't afford store-bought ones. The time I'd worked 3 consecutive shifts to afford the specialized graphing calculator Matthew needed for advanced math. The baseball games I'd attended, sitting alone among couples, cheering louder than anyone for my boy. Had those sacrifices meant nothing? Or had I somehow failed in ways I couldn't see, raising a son who could prioritize social climbing over the woman who had given everything for him? As I turned onto my street, memories continued flooding back. Matthew at 7, making me breakfast in bed for Mother's Day. Toast burnt beyond recognition but served with such pride. Matthew at 12, using his own savings to buy me a scarf when I admired it in a store window. Matthew at 18, his voice breaking as he thanked me during his graduation speech for never giving up on our family of two. Where was that Matthew now? When had status and appearances become more important than genuine connection? I parked in my driveway and sat there, unable to summon the energy to go inside. My phone chimed with a text message. It was from Andrea Reynolds, the wedding planner. Just checking everything is okay with the final payments. Bank showing some verification issues. I had forgotten that the final installments for several vendors were scheduled to process automatically today. My finger hovered over the screen. What was I obligated to do now? The financially responsible part of me, the businesswoman who had built a company on reliability, said I should ensure the payments went through as planned. After all, I had made a commitment. But another voice spoke louder. The voice of a mother who had just been publicly rejected by her son, who had been deemed unsuitable for his wedding day. Did I owe him this final gift when he had made it clear I wasn't welcome in his new life? I called Andrea instead of texting back. Eleanor, she answered, sounding surprised. I didn't expect a call. Is everything all right? No, I said simply. Everything is not all right. Matthew asked me to leave the wedding. Apparently, I wasn't actually invited. Andrea's sharp intake of breath was audible. What? But you're his mother. And you've paid for most of the event. He doesn't know that, I reminded her. And given today's events, I don't think he deserves to benefit from my contribution. What are you saying? Andrea asked cautiously. I'm saying I want to cancel all remaining payments, I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. Whatever has already been paid can remain, but nothing more will come from me. Eleanor, the reception, the catering, the band, the photographer, most of these vendors require final payment today or on service delivery. Without your contribution, there will be significant shortfalls. That's not my concern anymore, I said, surprising myself with my steadiness. Matthew made his choice today. Now I'm making mine. The Harringtons believe they've covered these expenses, Andrea said. They've been taking credit for the entire wedding. That revelation stung but didn't surprise me. Let them cover it then. If they're so concerned about appearances, they can pay to maintain them. Andrea was silent for a moment. I need to be professional here, but off the record, I don't blame you one bit. I've coordinated hundreds of weddings, and I've never seen a mother of the groom treated this way. Still, you should know this will cause significant disruption. Some vendors may refuse service entirely if final payments don't arrive. I understand the consequences, I said. Please ensure the payment cancellations are processed immediately. After ending the call, I finally went inside my house. The dress I had so carefully selected hung on my closet door, mocking me with its elegance. I changed into comfortable clothes, filled my bathtub with hot water and lavender oil, and tried to soak away the day's pain. My phone began ringing within the hour. Matthew's name flashed on the screen. I silenced it. Again it rang. Again I declined. Text messages followed, increasingly urgent. Mom, call me. It's important. Something's wrong with the payments. Vendors are threatening to leave. Mom, please. The caterers are demanding payment or they'll pack up. I turned my phone off completely, set it on my nightstand, and returned to the living room where I pulled out old photo albums. Pictures of Matthew through the years. His first steps. His first day of school. Camping trips and Christmas mornings. The journey of our small, tight family unit. When had money and status become more important than these genuine connections? When had my son decided I wasn't good enough to stand beside him on his wedding day? I made myself tea and sat with these painful questions as evening fell. Around 8 o'clock, I finally turned my phone back on. 27 missed calls. 15 voicemails. 36 text messages, not just from Matthew but from numbers I didn't recognize, likely wedding vendors or Harrington family members. I listened to the first voicemail, Matthew's voice tight with panic. Mom, everything's falling apart here. The reception venue is threatening to shut down. The caterers already left. Natalie's parents are freaking out. What did you do? Please call me back immediately. I deleted it and moved to the next. This one came 2 hours later. His tone shifted from panic to anger. I just spoke to Andrea. She told me everything. How could you do this? This was supposed to be the most important day of my life, and you ruined it out of spite. Call me back. The third voicemail, left just 30 minutes ago, had a different quality. His voice was quieter, with an edge of realization. Mom, Andrea told me you paid for almost everything. That you've been covering the costs all along. I didn't know. We need to talk. Please call me. I set the phone down and stared out the window at the darkening sky. Part of me felt vindicated that Matthew now knew the truth. Another part felt deeply sad that it had come to this, that our relationship had deteriorated to the point where such a dramatic revelation was necessary. I decided I would call him tomorrow, when emotions weren't so raw. Tonight, I needed to care for myself, to process my grief over not just missing my son's wedding, but realizing how much I had already lost him to a world that had no place for me. The next morning, I awoke to sunlight streaming through my bedroom curtains, and the persistent sound of knocking at my front door. I checked my phone first, finding another dozen missed calls from Matthew and several from unknown numbers. The knocking continued, more insistent now. I pulled on a robe and made my way downstairs, peering through the peephole to find Matthew standing on my porch. He wore the same suit pants from yesterday with a rumpled dress shirt, his tie gone, hair disheveled. He looked like he hadn't slept. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. You've been ignoring my calls, he said, his voice hoarse. Yes, I acknowledged simply. Can I come in? We need to talk. I stepped aside, allowing him into the house he'd grown up in but now rarely visited. He walked straight to the living room and sank onto the couch, running his hands through his hair. What happened yesterday? He demanded. Do you have any idea what you caused? I remained standing, arms crossed. I think the better question is what happened with you, Matthew? When did I become someone to be ashamed of? This isn't about shame, he protested. It was about fitting in with Natalie's family, meeting their expectations. Expectations that didn't include your mother at your wedding, I said flatly. It was complicated. No, it wasn't. A mother belongs at her son's wedding. That's not complicated at all. Matthew's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then silenced it with a frustrated sigh. The wedding was a disaster, he said. After you left, everything fell apart. The caterers packed up when their final payment didn't process. The band refused to play. The open bar closed. Even the photographer left after the ceremony. And the Harringtons couldn't cover these costs? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Matthew's expression darkened. Apparently not. Richard tried, but his cards were declined. It was humiliating. More humiliating than being asked to leave your only son's wedding? He had the grace to look ashamed at that. Andrea told me everything. That you'd been paying all along. That the Harringtons had contributed almost nothing despite what they claimed. Yes, I confirmed. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have made a difference? I countered. Would you have stood up to them, to Natalie, if you knew I was funding the wedding? Or would you have just found a more diplomatic way to keep me in the background? Matthew didn't answer, which was answer enough. Why did you cancel the payments? He asked instead. Was it revenge? No, I said quietly. It was self-respect. When you made it clear I wasn't welcome in your life on such an important day, I decided I wasn't obligated to fund a celebration. I wasn't allowed to attend. You could have warned me. You could have invited me. We reached an impasse, both hurt, both feeling justified. His phone rang again. This time he answered, turning slightly away from me. Yes, I'm with her now. I know, Natalie, I'm trying. I'll call you back. When he hung up, I asked, how is Natalie handling all this? Not well, he admitted. She's humiliated. Half her family left when the reception fell apart. She's blaming me for not knowing about the financial arrangements. And what about the Harringtons? Still concerned about appearances? Matthew winced. Richard is furious. He's claiming he was misled about the payment structure. Judith hasn't spoken to anyone since she tried to salvage the reception with store-bought cake and champagne. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of sympathy for Natalie. It wasn't entirely her fault that she'd been raised with certain values and expectations. I'm sorry her day was ruined, I said sincerely. That was never my intention when I offered to help financially. Then why did you do it? Matthew asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Why pay for everything secretly? Because I love you, I said simply. Because I wanted your day to be perfect, even if I wasn't fully welcome in your new life. I didn't need recognition or gratitude. I just wanted to contribute to your happiness. But then you took it all away.
No, Matthew.
You took it away when you decided your mother wasn't good enough to witness your marriage. When you chose status over family. Before Matthew could respond, the doorbell rang. I excused myself to answer it, surprised to find Natalie standing there, still in yesterday's clothing, makeup smudged from crying. Is Matthew here? She asked, her voice tight. We need to talk. I invited her in, leading her to the living room where Matthew stood as she entered. Natalie, he started, but she cut him off. Your mother canceled the payments? Is that true? She demanded. Yes, I answered for him. After being asked to leave the wedding, I decided not to fund a celebration I wasn't permitted to attend. Natalie turned to me, her composure cracking. Do you have any idea what you've done? Everyone was there. My parents' entire social circle. Business associates. Family from across the country. It was humiliating. I understand that, I said calmly. But perhaps you should ask yourself why it was acceptable to exclude the mother of the groom from an event she was largely funding. We didn't know you were paying, Natalie insisted. Would it have mattered if you did? I asked. Would your parents have welcomed me more warmly if they knew I was writing the checks? Or would they have found another way to handle the money while still keeping me at a distance? Natalie had no answer for that. My parents worked hard to create the right atmosphere, she finally said. They have standards, expectations. And I didn't meet those standards, I finished for her. Despite building a successful business from nothing, despite raising a son I'm incredibly proud of, or at least I was proud of the values I thought I'd instilled in him. Matthew flinched at that. We can discuss blame later, Natalie said, practicality asserting itself. Right now, we need to solve the immediate problem. Vendors are threatening legal action over breach of contract. My parents are beside themselves. That's between you and the vendors, I said. My financial obligation ended when my maternal role was dismissed. You can't just walk away from this, Natalie insisted. Actually, I can. And I have. Matthew, who had been quiet during this exchange, finally spoke. Mom, please. There must be some way to resolve this without destroying relationships. Relationships are built on mutual respect, I told him gently. Something that was notably absent yesterday. What do you want? Natalie asked directly. An apology? Public acknowledgement? What will it take to fix this? This isn't a negotiation, I explained. I'm not withholding funds to gain something. I'm respecting myself enough to walk away from people who don't value me beyond what I can provide financially. Natalie's phone chimed with a text. She read it and her expression fell further. The venue is charging a cleanup fee for the half-eaten reception. Another $10,000. I could see the mounting pressure on both of them, the reality of their situation sinking in. They had planned an extravagant wedding built on appearances and others' money, and now the foundation had collapsed. I think you both need time to figure things out, I said. Not just the financial aspects, but what kind of life and relationships you want to build. What values matter to you? So you won't help, Matthew said, a statement rather than a question. I've helped for 35 years, Matthew. I'll always be your mother, and I'll always love you. But I won't be used or hidden away because I don't fit someone else's idea of what's acceptable. They left shortly after, walking to their car in silence, the weight of consequences heavy on their shoulders. I watched from the window, feeling a complex mix of sadness, resolve, and a quiet hope that perhaps this painful lesson might eventually lead to growth. A week passed with no communication from Matthew or Natalie. I returned to my normal routine, focusing on work and self-care. I joined a community garden project I'd been putting off, finding solace in the simple act of nurturing plants. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected while trying to maintain my relationship with Matthew. Barbara Mitchell, my closest friend since our 20s, insisted on taking me to lunch at our favorite cafe downtown. At 70, Barbara had a directness that came from decades of not wasting time on pretense. "You did the right thing," she told me over salads and iced tea. "That boy needed a wake-up call about what truly matters." "I keep wondering if I went too far," I admitted. "Canceling the payments was dramatic." "Sometimes dramatic is necessary," Barbara said firmly. "You spent years accommodating his gradual rejection, making excuses, accepting less and less from your relationship. Sometimes a clean break is what forces people to reassess." "I just hope I haven't lost him completely." "If you have, then you lost him long before the wedding," Barbara pointed out. "The real question is whether this shock might bring back the Matthew you raised." Her words stayed with me as days turned into weeks. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Matthew and Natalie had postponed their honeymoon indefinitely. The wedding debacle had made rounds in local social circles, with various embellished versions of events being whispered at country club brunches. 3 weeks after the wedding day, I returned home from a volunteer shift at the community center to find Matthew sitting on my porch steps. He was alone, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking more like the son I remembered than the polished version who had emerged in recent years. "Can we talk?" he asked simply when I approached. I invited him inside, offered coffee which he accepted, and we settled in the kitchen, the heart of our home during his childhood. "I owe you an apology," he began without preamble. "What I did was unforgivable." I stayed silent, giving him space to continue. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks. About who I've become. About the choices I've made." He stared into his coffee cup. "I don't like what I see." "What happened with Natalie?" I asked gently. "We're taking some time apart," he said. "The wedding disaster forced us to have conversations we'd been avoiding. About values, about family, about what kind of life we want." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said and meant it. Despite everything, I hadn't wanted Matthew to experience more pain. "Don't be," he replied. "It's necessary. The truth is, I've been changing myself to fit into her world for so long. I'm not sure who I am anymore." "And what about the wedding expenses?" I asked, practical concerns still relevant. "The Harringtons eventually covered most of the outstanding balances," Matthew said. "It turns out they did have money, just not as much as they pretended. Richard had to liquidate some investments at a loss." I nodded, unsurprised. "Why didn't you tell me you were paying for everything?" Matthew asked. "Would it have changed anything?" I countered. He considered this seriously. "I want to say yes, but honestly I'm not sure. I was so caught up in impressing the Harringtons, in being accepted into their world. I convinced myself their approval was necessary for my happiness, for my future. And now I realize I sacrificed authentic relationships for superficial acceptance," he said, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "I rejected the one person who has always supported me unconditionally, who taught me values I used to be proud of, all to please people who measured worth by pedigree rather than character." His candor surprised me. "That's quite an insight." "It came at a high cost," Matthew acknowledged. "Not just the wedding but nearly losing you. When you canceled those payments, it wasn't just about the money. It forced me to face what I'd done, who I'd become." "That wasn't my intention," I said. "I acted out of self-preservation, not to teach a lesson." "I know. That almost makes it worse. You were simply standing up for yourself after I'd failed to stand up for you." He set his cup down with purpose. "I don't expect immediate forgiveness, Mom. What I did hurt you deeply, and rebuilding trust will take time. But I want you to know I'm committed to that process if you're willing." His sincerity touched me, though caution tempered my response. "What about Natalie? If you reconcile, where does that leave us?" "That's something Natalie and I are working through," Matthew said. "She's doing her own soul-searching. The wedding fallout affected her deeply too. Her parents' reaction, prioritizing appearances over her happiness, opened her eyes to some uncomfortable truths." "People can change," I offered, "if they want to badly enough." "That's what I'm counting on," Matthew said with a sad smile. "Including myself." We talked for hours that afternoon, more openly than we had in years. Matthew shared his doubts about the architectural firm where he worked, confessing he'd chosen projects based on prestige rather than passion. He admitted feeling constantly judged by the Harringtons, always slightly inadequate despite his efforts to conform. "I miss who I used to be," he confessed. "Someone who cared about creating beautiful, functional spaces for actual people, not just impressive showcases for the wealthy." "That person is still there," I assured him. "He's just been overshadowed for a while." As evening approached, Matthew prepared to leave, our conversation having reached a natural pause. At the door he hesitated. "The watch you gave me," he said quietly. "Dad's watch. I've been wearing it every day since the wedding. It reminds me of who I come from, of what really matters." Tears pricked my eyes. "He would be proud of you for reflecting and growing. That's all any parent wants, to raise a child who can recognize when they've strayed from their values and find their way back." "I'm trying," Matthew said. "It won't happen overnight, but I'm committed to becoming someone you can be proud of again." "I've always been proud of you," I told him truthfully. "I just want you to be proud of yourself too." We embraced briefly before he left, the contact slightly awkward but genuine. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a beginning, a step toward healing what had been broken between us. As I watched him drive away, I felt cautiously hopeful. Real change takes time and consistent effort. Whether Matthew could sustain this newfound insight remained to be seen, but his willingness to honestly confront his actions gave me reason to believe our relationship might eventually recover, perhaps even grow stronger through this painful experience. 6 months have passed since that disastrous wedding day. Spring has yielded to summer, and my garden blooms with vegetables and flowers I've tenderly nurtured. In many ways, my life has blossomed too, expanding in directions I hadn't anticipated. After decades of focusing primarily on business and motherhood, I've discovered new passions. The community garden project led to involvement with a local food security initiative. I now teach financial literacy workshops at the women's shelter twice monthly, helping others build the independence that sustained me through my own difficult times. My circle of friends has widened considerably. Barbara remains my closest confidant, but I've connected with a diverse group of women through my volunteer work. We meet for dinner regularly, sharing stories, wisdom, and laughter. At 68, I've found a community that values me for exactly who I am. As for Matthew, our relationship has undergone a gradual, thoughtful reconstruction. We didn't rush the process. For several months, we met weekly for Sunday breakfast, slowly rebuilding trust through consistent, honest communication. I learned that Matthew and Natalie did indeed separate permanently. Their relationship couldn't survive the fundamental questions raised by the wedding disaster. Matthew moved into a modest apartment downtown and began therapy to understand the patterns that had led him so far from his authentic self. "The strangest thing," he told me during one of our breakfasts, "is realizing how much happier I am with less. Less pretense, less striving for approval, less of everything the Harringtons valued." He left the prestigious architectural firm where he'd worked for years and joined a smaller practice focusing on sustainable community projects. The pay was considerably less, but the satisfaction greater. I recognized in him a return to the values we'd shared during his upbringing, when we'd found joy in connection rather than acquisition. Matthew apologized formally to Andrea Reynolds, the wedding planner, who later told me his sincere remorse had impressed her. "In 15 years of planning events for wealthy clients," she said, "I've rarely seen someone take responsibility so completely." Through Andrea, I learned that the Harringtons faced significant social fallout from the wedding debacle. Rumors circulated about their financial stability, and invitations to elite functions dwindled. Judith Harrington, according to reports, had taken a prolonged vacation to avoid the whispers. I took no pleasure in their difficulties. Status games create only losers in the end, as they discovered the hard way. What matters is authentic connection, mutual respect, and living with integrity, lessons the Harringtons had failed to teach their daughter. 3 months ago, I encountered Judith Harrington unexpectedly at a charity auction. I had donated design services from my company and was discussing details with the event coordinator when Judith appeared nearby, clearly uncomfortable at seeing me. Instead of avoiding her, I approached with a genuine smile. "Hello, Judith. It's been some time." Her composure faltered momentarily before social training reasserted itself. "Eleanor." Yes, indeed. I hope you're well, I said simply. She studied me, perhaps looking for sarcasm or triumph in my expression, finding none. We've had better seasons, she admitted with surprising candor. And you? I'm doing quite well, I replied. Life has a way of redirecting us toward what truly matters. Judith nodded slowly. Richard and I have been doing some reflecting of our own. Priorities can become distorted over time. It wasn't quite an apology, but it suggested growth, which was enough. We spoke briefly about neutral topics before parting amicably. As I walked away, I realized I felt no resentment toward her, only a quiet compassion. We all make mistakes in parenting, in relationships. The question is whether we learn from them. Last month, Matthew invited me to dinner at his apartment to mark what would have been his father's 70th birthday. He cooked James's favorite meal, pot roast with roasted vegetables, a recipe I had taught him years ago. We shared memories of James, some painful, many joyful, acknowledging the profound impact his absence had on our lives. I think I was trying to replace Dad with Richard Harrington, Matthew confessed as we sat with coffee afterward. Looking for male approval, for that father figure I lost. That's understandable, I told him. We all seek to fill the gaps in our lives, sometimes without realizing it. But I had you, Matthew said. You were both mother and father to me. You did everything possible to give me a good life, and I repaid that by rejecting you when it became inconvenient. We're human, Matthew. We make mistakes, learn, grow. What matters is where we go from here. I'd like to go forward with honesty, he said, and with gratitude for the mother who never gave up on me, even when I deserved it. Our relationship today isn't perfect, but it's authentic. We've established healthy boundaries and expectations. Matthew has returned to the thoughtful, compassionate man I raised, though now with added wisdom from difficult experience. I've learned to value myself enough to require respect, not just from my son but in all relationships. Perhaps the greatest lesson from this painful chapter is that love without boundaries isn't really love at all, but self-abandonment. True love, including parental love, must include self-respect. By standing firm in my worth that wedding day, I ultimately gave Matthew the opportunity to reclaim his authentic self. Would I make the same decision again, canceling those wedding payments after being asked to leave? Absolutely. Sometimes the kindest gift we can offer those we love is the gift of consequences, the chance to recognize when they've strayed from their values and find their way back. Life at 68 isn't what I expected, but it's rich with meaning, connection, and hard-won wisdom. I've learned that it's never too late to establish boundaries, to expect respect, to build community. Each day brings new opportunities to live authentically, guided by the values that truly matter. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to maintain your self-respect in a relationship? What boundaries have you established with loved ones? I'd love to hear your stories and insights in the comments below. Remember to like this video and subscribe if you found value in my experience. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to honor yourself while loving others unconditionally, but not unconditionally accepting unacceptable behavior. Your worth is non-negotiable, just as mine was on that wedding day.